My name is Peter Skiller, and my qualification for speaking to you tonight is that I am a colleague, friend, and accomplice of Stella Adams. Stella Adams says a good friend will come and bail you out of jail, but your best friend will be in jail with you. And I have served 20 years' time with Stella Adams. I first was introduced to Stella by the U.S. Department of Justice when they called me to say that they had settled the largest fair housing discrimination case in North Carolina's history, and that I should get to know Stella Adams because she was the lead investigator at the Durham Human Relations Commission that made that possible. It seems there was a landlord who believed that he was willing to rent to anyone who came to him as long as the blacks were in this building and the whites were in that building and the Latinos were in that building. And that settlement that Stella secured remains today the largest fair housing settlement in North Carolina's history. She went on to become the executive director of the North Carolina Fair Housing Center, where I served with her as a board member. And she enforced the fair housing law many times across the country and in the state. In her bio, it talks about $60 million worth of settlements out of her investigations into predatory lending. And she's become so good that she's now the executive director of the National Fair Housing Training Academy, providing that education and inspiration across the country. And as a result of her work and her expertise, she's been awarded for her fair housing work by the City of Durham, by the North Carolina Housing Coalition, by the National Fair Housing Alliance, by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, by the National Association of Human Rights Workers, by the International Human Rights Organizations, and now tonight by the North Carolina NAACP. She has been awarded time and again for her commitment and contribution to our community. But I want to explain to you that it's not just the awards and the work. You have to understand her perspective. She makes the argument that fair housing is like Kevin Bacon and 7 Connections. You know that with 7 Connections you can find your link to Kevin Bacon? That's the same with fair housing. And she can always do it probably in 2. So if you want to fight about school integration and neighborhood schools, that's a fair housing issue about where you live. That's right. And if you want to talk about who got what loan at what price and whether it was fair or not, that's a fair housing conversation. And if you want to talk about race relations and how we get along, that's a fair housing issue because where we live fundamentally determines our opportunities in life, how well we get along, and as a community, are we together or not? And so Ms. Adams' work in fair housing is not just about being an expert, it's about that vision and passion of the beloved community. Now Stella is also a passionate activist. When Nations Bank used to have Nations Credit, the predatory lender, and they were merging with Bank of America, we went down to Charlotte to meet with them to talk about what reforms we'd like. And the leadership came late, left early, disrespected us, and said, we're big, you're little, and you can kiss our corporate grits. And man, Stella was hot. And she reflected on it a little bit. She came back to me the next day. She says, Peter, I've decided to go on a hunger strike against Bank of America. I says, well, Stella, you know, we appreciate your commitment, but that's pretty severe. She says, no, she says, I believe this is the right thing to do. And from a spiritual perspective, she committed herself to more than 30 days of nothing but a liquid diet. And Bank of America came back to the table at our community meeting. They came early, they left late, and they heard humbly what the community people had to say. And that was so happy. When Citibank decided to buy the Associates, I read it and I said, oh man, that's bad news. Stella walked into my office and she says, I'm hot. She says, how are we going to have the biggest bank buy the worst predatory lender to become the biggest, baddest predatory lender? She says, that's blood money. This fight is on. Phone rang. I picked it up. It's the American banker. They said, what do you think about this merger? I says, we can't have the biggest bank buy the biggest predatory lender. That's blood money. This fight is on. Bam, in the quote. From Stella's mouth to the American banker. You know, and it was that fired up leadership that gets people mobilized for the NAACP when we marched from the convention over to the Fayetteville City Associates office and shut them down for the afternoon. Or when we got into the New York Times. Or even when we lost that fight, it was the next merger that Stella was there fighting at the Office of Thrift Supervision for the acquisition of the Kraut Thrift merger. She says, we're going to fight this fight until we win. And that's why activists across the country know her and love her for her contribution. But that's not just the activists. She also has spoken before Congress several times. She served on the Federal Reserve Board's Consumer Advisory Council. Chairman Ben Bernanke knows Stella Adams. He likes Stella. But you know what? He also respects Ms. Adams because of her expertise and her vision to see what needs to be done. Stella Adams is an educator. Her mother was a pioneer in integrating our school system by being a black teacher in a white school and paid that price. And I think Stella learned that lesson as she moved on to preach and educate across the country, empowering others to be civil rights activists. The Bible says, I'm going to paraphrase here, they will know you by your faith, by your works. And if the description of the works that I've talked about so far give you an idea, I think it's perhaps even more important to know how she does that work. Because her theology, her identity as a Christian, her deep, deep faith allows her to carry out that advocacy on a principle of loving thy enemy. She can slap up a bank left and right in the media with the regulators, and then when she walks into the room to meet with them, somehow manages to give genuine hugs and love all the way around. She's also able to forgive. And oftentimes it's forgiving our friends and family and allies that are best as we wrestle with democratic politics and wrestle with allies. And Stella is a marvelous person for being able to forgive and to accept people for who they are. Because she's committed to building that beloved community and doing that, building across race lines, building across gender, building across religion, and being with the person who's unpopular in the crowd because she understands it takes all of us. And it's out of that faith that she's able to do that. I love Stella, as you can tell. And we're driving around. We've traveled thousands of miles together over that 20 years, up across North Carolina, up to D.C., across the country doing our work. And on one of those talks, we were saying, you know what? If one of us dies first, we want the other to do the eulogy. I says, all right. I said, so Stella, if you die, what do you want me to do? She says, all right. She says, first, no matter how I die, even if I die of the common cold, you have to say that the man did it. She says, the man got me. I says, okay, I got you. She says, because I want everybody to know I went down fighting. All right, I got that. I said, what's the second thing? She says, well, I want my last act to be a protest. I want to be a statement for civil rights. And you know, the last place that you live, the last place that you go is a cemetery where they bury you. So I would like you to bury me in an all-white cemetery so I can integrate it. Because according to the 7 laws of Kevin Bacon, everything is a fair housing issue, and cemeteries are too. I love Stella. We love Stella. Would y'all please give it up for Stella Adams?
Give it up for Stella. McLean Distinguished Service Award presented to Stella Jones Adams, who is now also currently our State Fair Housing Chair from the North Carolina Conference of Branches of the NAACP. Give it up one more time.
I knew I was going to do this. Thank you. Thank you all so much. This This Distinguished Service Award means so much to me, and it means so much to me to be getting it at the same time as my hero, Andrea Harris, is receiving the Humanitarian Award. Peter, you told all our business. But I got a joke I'm gonna tell about you too. So I go up to DC to my job at the National Fair Housing Training Academy, and this is before I'm the director. I just got hired as the director of curriculum and instruction. And so we're working, I've been there about 10 days, and I'm such an advocate and everything, and so the director at the time said, Stella, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And he says, are you married to a white man? And I was like, no, I'm married to this beautiful black man named T.C. Adams. See his picture? I had to get pictures from home and all like that. And I said, T.C., they think I'm married to a white man. Where in the world did that come from? He was like, I have no idea. He said, I asked him I have to come up there and see you. And I was like, okay. I was like, this is so weird. I just don't know where it came from. So about 2 days later, Peter called and he said, hey, Stella, how you doing? I'm coming up to DC. Do you need me to bring you anything? I said, yeah, go by the house, pick up some dresses, some shoes. Oh.
This is how get started.
I'm like, I started laughing. I said, I think you're the white man I'm married to. And he goes, what? I said, yeah, when I got up here, they said, everybody at HUD said I was married to a white guy. And then he said, oh, you know where that came from? And I was like, no. And he said, remember when we got the award? Because while he talked about the award, we shared those awards. He was like, you remember when Shauna introduced us for that Predatory Linden Award? She said we were the most interesting interracial couple she knew. And that was at a HUD policy conference. And I was like, oh, okay. But Reverend Barbara, it has been just such a pleasure to be your handmaiden for justice. And Peter's right. Everything does center around fair housing. And if we had integrated neighborhoods, Trayvon Martin wouldn't have been suspicious walking to his home.
That's right.
There wouldn't have been anything suspicious about a black child with Skittles and some Arizona tea walking home to his daddy's house.
That's right.
But we don't live in integrated neighborhoods. But I'm going to share with you, because my brother Martin, who was the winner of the humanitarian last year, he shared some of why he did what he did, and I'm going to be short because we're honoring Andrea Harris here tonight as well. But my uncle, Pernell Foster, was the Trayvon Martin of his generation. 70 years ago, in March, he was shot dead in Little Rock, Arkansas, by a policeman while he was a sergeant in the Army right after World War II began. And he was a sergeant. There was a base, an Army base down there, and he was with the Engineering Corps. And he was a sergeant, so he was the highest ranked African American, because you couldn't be officers back then. They had white officers over the troops. And in Little Rock, Arkansas, the Germans could eat in the restaurants, but the black soldiers could not. And there was a drunk soldier under his command who was drunk and disorderly and was being beaten by the Little Rock police department. And he stepped in his role as the highest ranking person to say, now, that's enough, let me take him back to the base. And they started beating on him, and according to the record that they keep in Little Rock, and by the way, he's mentioned in Bill Clinton's history, a place called Hope. They beat him, knocked him down on the ground, and shot him 5 times in the back. You've heard, if you're historians in here, you heard of the double V campaign, victory at home and victory abroad. And that movement was sparked by his death. Daisy Bates, who is the person who started with the NAACP on the Little Rock 9, she wrote the story. That was her first news story. It was her motivation to get involved in civil rights. And so it pains me that 70 years later, we still can't walk down the streets. And so I want to thank my husband, because I don't get to do that a lot. But I can act up because he stands behind me. He's got my back. When I went on a hunger strike, he had to approve it. Yeah, He said, I gotta be able to stop it at any time. And I was like, yes, dear. But he has stood behind me, he has let me travel the world to fight injustice. He has supported us. He's just been incredible. And I just appreciate him. We'll be married 30 years in July.
All right.
And so thank you all. This means more to me than anything because it comes from the NAACP. And it comes from my friends. And I appreciate you all so much.
Amen.